Hello. Welcome to Engaging Your Non-Specialist, Non-Technical Listener in Just 3 Minutes with John Bandler, Aaron Kiley, and Daniel Tajik. I'm Mike Hamilton, your host for this IEEE Microwave Theory and Technique Society webcast, which is sponsored by our MTTS Education Committee. Before we start, I'll mention a few housekeeping items. First, this presentation will be archived. A recording should be posted approximately 24 hours after we finish the presentation. We'll send all registrants an email when the archive webinar goes up so you can revisit it or share it with your colleagues. Second, we encourage questions. We're having a slightly different format this webinar compared to past MTTS webinars. So we'll have multiple speakers and we'll answer questions at various points throughout the presentation today. So you can submit them at any time during the discussion. Enter your questions in the Q&A box on the left side of the webcast window, and don't forget to click the button labeled Submit. Third, some words about the interface. You can enlarge the slides by clicking on the rectangle at the top right of the live slide window. You can also enter full screen mode if you desire. Refresh or reload the current web page if you encounter any problems. With regards to audio, if you're listening over your computer speakers, you can adjust the media player volume. You may also need to adjust your system's master volume. The icons at the bottom of the webinar window include a resource list. Clicking that link will start the process to download copies of the slides that will be presented today. Now let's introduce our speakers. John Bandler is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at McMaster University. He's an engineer, entrepreneur, innovator, researcher, artist, speaker, and author of fiction, including stage plays. He has won several awards, including the Microwave Application and Microwave Career Awards from IEEE MTTS. In '97, Hewlett-Packard acquired his company, Optimization Systems Associates Incorporated. He's a fellow of several societies, including the IEEE and Royal Society of Canada, and has been honored by Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. He delivers workshops and mentors individuals for presentations and co-organized the first ever and second 3-minute thesis competition for the IEEE International Microwave Symposium, an event he is also co-organizing for the third time in 2019. Erin Kiley is an assistant professor of mathematics at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. She's an applied mathematician whose research specializes in modeling and computational electromagnetics, including problems in microwave centering. She received her Bachelor of Science in Math and Statistics and BA in Russian from the University of New Hampshire and her Master of Science in Applied Math, and then in 2016 her PhD in Math from Worcester Polytech. She co-organized the first ever and second 3-minute thesis competition for the IEEE Microwave Symposium, an event she is also co-organizing for 2019. And then Daniel Tajik received his bachelor's degree in electrical and biomedical engineering and master's degree in electrical and computer engineering from McMaster University in 2015 and 2017, respectively. His PhD research is focused on developing microwave image processing algorithms for use in medical diagnostics. His interests include applications of microwave engineering in breast cancer imaging, stroke detection, concealed weapon detection, etc. In 2017, Daniel won both the first place and the Audience Choice Awards in the first ever 3-minute thesis competition at IMS for his presentation on microwave holography, the future of medical imaging. And then in 2018, Daniel won first place for the same presentation in the first ever electrical and computer engineering graduate 3-minute thesis competition at McMaster University. So now it's my pleasure to turn the virtual podium over to our speakers for engaging your non-specialist, non-technical listener in just 3 minutes. John?
Thanks very much, Mike, and welcome everyone who's online with us. Daniel is here sitting with me in my room, so we're right next to each other. We can give each other a nudge if necessary. And Erin is in Massachusetts in her office. So let's jump into this. The first sort of disclaimer, if you like, is beware of experts, teachers, gurus, and peers, an unusual thing to say, who cheat you with false praise. And of course, we would be regarded by some of you as experts or teachers or gurus, perhaps peers. So really what we're saying is we may be wrong in everything that we're telling you. You have to use your own judgment. And, very frequently when you take a script or a slide or do a presentation in front of a teacher or expert, you may actually get false information for many reasons. If anyone has a question on that, by all means, shoot us a question as to why I say that. This is us again, and thanks, Mike, for the third time we're doing a webinar like this with you. It's been a pleasure every time, and hopefully we'll do these in future years. Okay, our agenda. We'll discuss problems with technical presentations in general. We'll talk about 3-minute presentations. We will give examples. We'll look at case studies, in particular Kan-Chiu Zhang's 3-minute speech that will be discussed in detail. Daniel is going to go through that with a tooth comb. We'll talk about slide composition, the formulation of titles, the theatricality of it. So this is not just a presentation, but it's also perhaps a little bit of entertainment in a certain sense. And then certain presentation do's and don'ts, things you should do, things you shouldn't do, and some concluding remarks. Now, we will not cover everything. We'll give you all kinds of references to books and videos that you can check a lot of these things later. Now, typical technical slides, as we all know, are crammed with text. They usually have small images, dense tables, lengthy equations, often detailed flow diagrams. Logos are all over the place that interfere with the real estate on your slide. And, of course, typically people have too many slides. And that's one of the reasons that when you're at a conference, after the second or third paper that you went to in the morning, you really feel like going and becoming a tourist, because so many technical presentations are just overloaded with material. As we, again, probably know, most typical oral deliveries are ill-prepared, rushed. The speaker is often distant, typically runs out of time. It doesn't matter whether you give a speaker 3 minutes, 20 minutes, or 50 minutes. They always seem to be up against a time limit. There's often little time or no time for questions. Sometimes the speaker speaks in a monotone, and sometimes the speaker swallows words. Swallowing words in a manner that doesn't allow the audience to hear them is not cool. It's actually quite annoying. Now, making your audience want more takes practice, awareness, and empathy. The sort of empathy that you really need to put yourself into the shoes or into the mind of the audience and try to figure out how you're really coming across. And that's, again, where some of your friends may be your worst enemies. If you deliver a presentation to a friend or a family member, they may say, oh, this is great, no problem, everything's fine. And yet it may not really go down very well with a general audience. There's lots to consider in a presentation. There's your speech itself, there's your slide, and there's how you yourself present yourself. Let's concentrate, let's say in the top right-hand corner there, on first impressions. First impressions are really quite crucial, particularly in a competitive presentation. Judges will typically make up their mind about you in the first 10, 20, 30 seconds, and it becomes very difficult to change that later on. You really have to work miracles to move that first impression one way or another. Your authenticity is important, the way you speak, your articulation. Are the words coming across clearly? Are you aware of the audience, or your awareness of how you're coming across? And of course, you need to be remembered, and hopefully you'll be remembered for the right reasons. Again, in no particular order here, as far as your slides are concerned, there are aspects of composition, how the slide is composed, citations, and I'll come back to that later on. Frequently, people put in images and formulas without citation. That's a very bad idea, both in a technical presentation as well as 3NT. Because if you put in an image that has come from somewhere else and you haven't given a citation, the author of that material may be sitting in the audience, and that isn't going to go down too well. Now, in your speech, are you telling a story? Are you being persuasive? Are you biased? Does the audience trust you? What kind of subtext are you carrying? Now, I'm saying a lot of stuff here that many of you may not be familiar with, like subtext, which is quite difficult. You'll find more on subtext in some of the references and resource material that we've listed here. Of course, a 3-minute thesis is not quite an elevator pitch, but if someone has a question on that, by all means, go ahead and throw that question at us. There's a whole bunch of video resources that I would suggest. My YouTube channel has quite a number of them. The very first one is on the McMaster University YouTube channel. I gave a presentation in San Francisco on effective presentations. You can find that on my YouTube channel. And a couple more with Anna Kovacevic, for example. Then the bottom one is the playlist from the inaugural 3-minute thesis competition at IMS 2017 in Honolulu, where Daniel Tajik, who's sitting right next to me, was both the first place winner and the audience choice winner. And if you want to see his video, is definitely worth watching. You really have to watch that. It's become almost a template for people to use. So you should definitely watch his video. Again, more workshops. A webinar from last year that Daniel and Erin Kiley and I gave, and the playlist from the second IMS 3-minute thesis competition is also there, lots of stuff. And finally, in these resources, you'll find the playlist of our very first 3-minute thesis competition in my own electrical and computer engineering department at McMaster University. So those are some of the references. There's more at the end of this presentation, and we can come back to that later on. So, 3MT.
Right. Hi. So this is Erin.
Yeah.
So, in the name of encouraging students and young professionals to give presentations that are accessible as opposed to the ones that do make you want to become a tourist, as John had said, we had decided 3 years ago at the International Microwave Symposium to start running our own 3-minute thesis competition. That went very successfully. Our first year was 2017 in Honolulu. We gave that 3MT competition again in 2018 in Philadelphia, where it was again successful, and we're going to be doing another one this year. So several of you we saw among the attendees list have registered for that 3MT competition and have been selected as finalists, so congratulations to you. We're very glad to see that you're online with us to hear our advice. Good. So what's the deal with the IMS 3-minute thesis competition? Right? So we want to showcase students and young professionals who've distilled their highly complex technical research into presentations that are accessible to non-specialists. This has always been our goal. The IMS competition follows the format of the official trademarked 3-minute thesis, which was founded by the University of Queensland and which we've adapted for our own format. So the requirements are quite simple. You need to give a 3-minute or less oral presentation using only one static PowerPoint slide. That is, no animations. You can't use any props, no dancing or things like that. Just one 3-minute or less oral presentation using a single static PowerPoint slide. So a presenter would have 3 minutes to present years of their complex research, to kindle excitement and curiosity in a general audience, and to make that general audience want to hear more. Right? This is very different than giving a 10 or a 20-minute technical talk to an audience that you know has a lot of training in your subject area. Again, the audience here is a general one. The judges for this competition this year, we have a poet laureate, we have a life coach, we have an NPR announcer, we have communication specialists, we have people who are not engineers. So you're going to want to make yourself accessible to them and make them curious about your talk. What will presenters gain by doing the 3-minute thesis, either at IMS or at their own universities? They'll gain research communication skills, but you only gain those if you train and practice for this, right? You gain confidence, and you gain an opportunity to share your work. At some competitions, including ours, you have an opportunity to win cash prizes if you're selected by this panel of judges. Now, the adjudicating panel's decision is the final one, and we don't ask them how they come to their decisions. We just let them choose which presenters are the ones that will be winning cash prizes, right? So it really is your goal to compel that panel of judges to want to hear more. Okay? I think John wanted to cut in here and talk about some jargon.
Right.
In the vein of not confusing non-specialists.
Right. Thanks, Erin. That's a great summary and a great introduction to the IMS 2019 in Boston and the judges. Definitely, consider those judges when you're writing your script. So you need to cut the jargon. That means you have to use words that you're seeing on this particular slide extremely sparingly. Now, on the right-hand column, there are words that I think are in general use. The general public will have heard words like holography, polymer, DNA, amplifier, and so on. They don't necessarily know what they mean, but they maybe feel comfortable with those ideas, so that it doesn't evoke any great fear. But words like impedance, admittance, really are generally completely meaningless to the general public. Now, words like parameter, model, and vector, again, can be completely misunderstood. The word model is something that means totally different things in totally different fields, and even though we use them all the time in engineering, even using words like that, you have to be really, really careful. Of course, there's extreme jargon like differential, like phase shifter, isotropic, and so on, which absolutely you should really not use. Now, if you need to use a word, for example, like holography, and Daniel Tajik used the word holography, you use it in a way that makes the audience somehow feel attached to it. You use it like a label, like a name. You have to use it really sparingly, and you have to repeat it. You can't just throw it out once and let it hang there. Again, if someone has any questions on this, by all means, let us know. And here are some more words that are, again, jargon words. So words in general usage, people hear about deep learning, about the words like cortex and algorithm. They may be in general use, but people still don't necessarily understand them. A poet and a weather forecaster or an artist, for example, really would have a very vague idea of what those words mean. And of course, words like climate, Donald Trump misunderstands the word climate, so everybody else is likely to misunderstand it too. Words like median and mean are highly misunderstood. And of course, there's the extreme jargon like Bayesian and exponent, which you really need to avoid. So cutting the jargon is really quite essential, and using it very, very sparingly, and repeating it if it comes out of the blue. Now, lots of things to consider when you're doing a 3-minute thesis. One of my rules is 120 words maximum per minute. So 3 minutes means 360 words. If you go over 360 words, you're going to rush too fast. It's just not going to work. Start very early on your slide and integrate it with your speech. Do not write a speech first and then figure out a title and then figure out a slide. It really doesn't work that way. Your slide is going to be up there for nearly 3 minutes, and it's telling a story all by itself. and that story had better be something that complements your speech. So it's really important to start very early on your slide. Obviously, indicate your qualifications in some way by indicating you're a graduate student, PhD student, etc. Consider the story format. If you start with a story about Cinderella, you better finish the story with Cinderella. If you start a story by gesturing at the audience and saying, you know, have you ever thought of this or have you ever thought of that, then you have to end that speech in the same manner. You have to sort of conclude your presentation the way you started it. Be very specific. Avoid generalities. Rehearse with people who've never heard you speak before. Make eye contact. Don't look like you're reading a script. Articulate clearly, and use pauses. The floor is yours. Nobody's going to interrupt you. So pauses are as important as words, and you should use them. Now, memorize the speech well. Memorize it so well that you can say it anywhere at any time, so that it doesn't look like you're reading a speech. So in our case study that's coming up shortly, look for metaphors, look for believability, look for purposeful gestures, look for ways in which the contestant is engaging with the slide. In other words, looking at the slide. Look for pauses, dramatic pauses. Look how the speaker makes the speech relatable. Look at humor, look at storytelling, and also see what is it that the audience can take away from this presentation.
Okay, thanks, John. So now we're going to look at a 3MT presentation done by Kanchu Zhang. She was a graduate student at McMaster University, and she came in second place with this presentation. And before I get into the video of the presentation, I'd just like for everyone to take a look at her slide, because I think it's very well done. Yep, so, very good. All right, and now let's take a look at the video.
Have you, your relatives, your friends ever suffered from a stroke? A stroke could happen to you at any time. You may even be completely unaware of it. Late diagnosis could result in permanent disability or even death. My name is Tan Xiu. I want to detect this condition earlier and prevent these tragedies from occurring. Let me tell you about the brain. Brain cell activity generates brain waves. They reveal information about this activity, like billions of radio stations transmitting data every single second. This information can include abnormal cerebral blood flow, which is a sign of brain stroke. This information is key, but challenging to extract from the massive amount of data. My research is to find the brainwave information most relative to the brain strokes and detect it in a quick and easy way. I calculated a list of numbers, each number representing how brain activity changes in the different locations of the brain at different times. However, these numbers are encrypted in a higher dimensional space. It's like trying to read a message on a crumpled paper ball. So how would you read this information? By unfolding the piece of paper, of course. This is exactly what I did mathematically. After I unfolded the special higher dimensional space of the numbers I calculated, the difference between brain waves from a normal person compared to a person who had a stroke became clear and detectable. My method was able to detect a stroke with 92% accuracy within 30 seconds. Now I'm working on the next step. After unfolding stretching the space to make that difference even clearer for detection. In the future, a stroke still could happen to you at any time. But this time, you will be aware of it. Your loved ones, your family members can help you better. Thank you.
All right, so just push to that one, please. Perfect. Just before I get into talking about Kenshu's presentation, just so that everyone's aware, at the bottom there's a Q&A tab where you can ask questions, and we can answer them either in the tab or after I've gone through this presentation. So feel free to add those questions in that Q&A tab. So
yeah, we'll be stopping later for some more questions.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, so what is Kenshu's hook? Her hook is, have you, your relatives, your friends ever suffered from a stroke? It's a very powerful opening line that tries to relate directly to you and this very serious issue of a stroke. And so she's trying to stir up some drama in this opening segment. Something that's a little bit more subtle, and why I wanted you to look at the slide earlier, is that this opening line doesn't seem to directly connect with the slide that she's showing. So it also sparks a bit of curiosity. Why is she showing this crumpled piece of paper, and how does that connect to a stroke? And so this relates to something that John was saying earlier about crafting your slide with writing your presentation. If you do this, you can use your slide as a device to further inspire curiosity in your audience and captivate them. So let's dive into the presentation now. So the first thing that you probably noticed throughout Kenshu's presentation is that she used a lot of emphatic hand gestures. And these gestures help describe what she's talking about and make sure that her point is very clear. You notice that, for instance, when she's talking later on about transmitting and radio waves, she's using a lot of hand motions that show and demonstrate this transmission. When she's talking to the audience, she points directly to the audience. It's these types of hand gestures that show that she's connected in the moment with her audience. She also uses, quite frequently, dramatic fragments, and so she breaks up her sentences into little chunks that help emphasize the words she's saying. So in her opening, she really wants to emphasize that these relatives, friends, they're you, right? And they're connected directly to you. So the impact of what she's talking about should be felt directly by you. So with that, she's hooked you. She continues on to talk about strokes and make it very personal and also make it very intense. She's talking about something that can cause permanent disability and death, and she highlights that very clearly. Throughout this, you also noted that she uses a lot of pauses, and pauses are very important to not only break apart your presentation and make it more palatable to the audience, but they help emphasize key impactful points that you want to make. So here she wants to really emphasize death and permanent disability, and so she gives a little bit of a pause there so her audience can appreciate that. You also note that she's started with this drama, this sort of problem, and what you want to do when you craft these sorts of presentations is answer the questions that pop up in the audience's mind as they're listening to you. So as you introduce this problem, a common question that the audience may come up with is, what are you going to do to solve it? And that's where Kenshu steps in right away and provides that answer. She wants to detect this condition early and prevent these tragedies from occurring. You note here that she also introduces herself. My name is Kenshu. I think this is pretty key to ensure that you pronounce your name correctly in case the person who's introducing you was unable to pronounce your name correctly. So you make sure that everyone can understand and hear clearly what your name is. So then she gets into the main chunk of her research, and this is probably the most challenging part, developing the analogies that help explain what your research is. And I think Kenshu does a great job in the metaphors that she uses. For instance, these billions of radio stations transmitting signals relating to the brain. So these relatable analogies help break down your complex research and make it very palatable for a layperson audience. So you can continue forward. Yeah. And again, we see more emphatic fragments here. Here she's trying to highlight this abnormal cerebral blood flow and emphasize again that impact of a stroke being a very serious issue. You also note that she repeats brain stroke, and you can use repetition to ensure that key words in your presentation are remembered by your audience. So Can't You Hear really wants her audience to remember this word brain stroke because it is fundamentally what her research is about. So she continues onwards, talking now about what she wants to do specifically in her research to solve this problem of a brain stroke and how she's going to try and extract this brainwave information and parse through it to figure out exactly where the brain stroke or if the brain stroke is occurring. She again continues with these analogies, and I think one very nice thing that she does is she avoids jargon. And jargon can be very confusing to an audience, and the only real complex phrasing that she uses here is this phrasing of higher dimensional space. And immediately following that, she explains it with her slide. So you can use jargon as long as you use it sparingly and you go into detail describing exactly what it means. So she does a great job. And this right here, that moment where she talks about this higher dimensional space, is where she finally connects with her slide. And so this curiosity that's been building throughout the presentation is finally satisfied. She turns towards her slide, points towards it, and describes with this visual image exactly what she's doing in order to figure out if an individual is having a brain stroke. So very cleverly done and really captivated the audience all the way to this point. So she continues on explaining her research all the time using very clear, meaningful gestures. You notice that she's moving around on the stage a lot. It shows that she's very emotionally attached to the subject, which is very important. And she constantly keeps the story simple. She doesn't get too complex with how her method works or the mathematics behind it. She keeps it very understandable to her audience. And after she's explained all of it, she reaches the final bottom line. What is she able to achieve with her research? Now, there's one thing I want to caution here, is that when she explains this, she says, my method was able to detect a stroke with 92% accuracy within 30 seconds. I would caution using numbers in 3-minute thesis presentations because sometimes they can be a little bit difficult to relate to. You don't exactly understand whether this number is good relative to what they're talking about or not so good. If I could give an example, if you have a device that you've been able to develop and it has a 17% efficiency increase, while that 17% relatively may mean a lot, to a layperson audience, it may not be as impactful. So be cautious with using numbers to describe how successful your method is. So once she's done that, she set her bottom line, what she's achieved. She looks forward to the future, and it shows that to your audience, you care about this topic that you're studying, and you want to pursue it further. So she gives her ideas, her future work, and helps show how connected she is to this topic. So she finally comes to the conclusion of her presentation, and you note here that she bookends her presentation very well. Her opening line was, have you, your relatives, your friends ever suffered from a stroke? And here she concludes with, in the future, a stroke could still happen to you or your loved ones, your family members, etc., etc. So she uses this repetition to conclude her presentation and really give a satisfying conclusion to the audience as well, while remaining relatable and connected directly with her audience. And so that's how she ends her presentation. It's always nice and respectful to end with a thank you, and I recommend that for everyone. And so that was an overview of Can't You's presentations, and I notice we have some questions here, so maybe we can answer some of those now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's time for questions to be answered. Mike, are you there?
Yes. So let's see. There's a question here. How do we effectively hook the audience if our research is not addressing a dramatic scenario like a life or death situation?
That's a tricky question.
Well, okay, the idea of 3-minute thesis is communication skill. And, of course, if you have an intrinsically exciting project that is life and death, then that, in a way, you have an advantage. I think what you have to do is to make the audience feel that you care about that subject, that you're really why you're doing it, why you're so passionate about it. Indicate your own passion, indicate your own story, what attracted you to it, and why you feel it's important. So I think it's more of your own personal journey than that brings out the excitement. You need to convey enthusiasm and excitement to the audience.
I think the real key thing here is sparking curiosity in your audience. So you can use that technique that I was describing earlier, where you craft a slide that doesn't necessarily seem attached to your title of your presentation. So that spark of curiosity is a very good hook to keeping them captivated. There's also other presentations that have used humor very effectively at the beginning of the presentation. And so if that's something you want to use, you can also use that. So it really comes down, it is very difficult, of course. It's easier when you have something that's relatable directly to your audience. But the key thing there, you just want to look for something that sparks some curiosity in your audience. So if you can find a way to achieve that, then you don't need something that is as dramatic as death or something relating to medical illness or whatnot in order to captivate your audience.
Erin, do you want to jump in on that?
Right. Anything tangible that might be relevant to the audience. It doesn't have to be a life or death thing, just something that people will relate to. We've had 3MT competitors at the International Microwave Symposium before talking about, for example, batteryless devices, and they'll start by mentioning specific handheld electronics and asking the audience to imagine if they didn't need to charge them all the time or something like that. It could be highly technical research in an area, but if you can relate it back to something that the audience already knows and can imagine how your research is improving it, then that will hook them, right? That's the goal of a hook.
Any other questions there, Mike, that you'd like to?
Well, actually, Erin answered some of those. So, Erin, did you see any of these other questions that you thought would be relevant at this point?
Right. So someone asked the question, in a context with colleagues and in a highly technical audience, should jargon still be avoided? My answer to that was not necessarily. It's to your great advantage if you personally know your audience members and can use your own judgment as to what they will understand. But when I'm giving presentations to my own colleagues in math, I typically assume that everyone has an undergraduate level education in my field, but that their specialties may have been different during grad school and afterward, right? So even when I'm giving presentations at a math conference, I give them at an undergraduate level. Again, the 3MT competition at IMS and at most other places is being judged by non-specialists. I mean, you can assume that they have an undergraduate education in a field that's very different from yours, right? So I guess that's what I would say, is that if you're giving technical style presentations, still give them to an audience of undergrads in that technical field. If you're giving presentations that you know are to a totally non-technical audience, speak as though they were undergrads in some other field.
There's a question here that I can answer again about this issue of humanitarian impact. Again, clearly, if your work has immediate and direct humanitarian impact, you do have some advantages there, but and conventional, what one might call conventional microwaves, may have a bit of a disadvantage. But I think you really have to try. In any case, if you're in a thesis defense situation and you have external examiners, people from outside your field and department, how do you explain what you're doing to them? I think 3-minute thesis is an excellent vehicle to hone skills that allow you to communicate something of what you're doing to people that are outside your immediate field. At some point, you have to talk to a manager. At some point, you might have to talk to someone who has a deep pocket that you want to put your hand into, and they may not understand the jargon. You have to be able to put even the most abstract work has to be somehow put into a frame that can be understood.
Yeah, I think also the key here is not when it comes to these competitions, who has the best or most impactful research. That's not the objective of the 3-minute thesis. The objective to see is who can explain their research the best in that 3-minute timeline. So there have been a lot of great presentations that have not related at all to humanitarian issues that have done very well. There was one winner at McMaster whose presentation was on acting, and he was able to win all the way up to the Ontario competition. So it really comes down to how well you talk about your research during that presentation time, rather than is your final application considered the most impactful.
Yeah. There's a question here, again, about Kanchu having a success story, 92% effective, et cetera. Not all research is at that maturity level. Again, let me just reiterate, how would you explain your work to a friend who's outside your field, to a family member, to a parent? I think you do your best to convey your enthusiasm for it, what drove you into it, and surely there must be your work must fit into some kind of an end goal that ultimately benefits, if not society, then at least it benefits other engineers.
Mm-hmm. And I would also recommend you take a look at some of the other presentations, especially the ones that I believe are linked in this presentation here, because not all of them have these concrete values like Kanchu's presentation. So if you're curious to see how other successful presentations conclude, take a look at those, and they should clarify that point.
Yeah, and there's a question here about whether in our competition the candidate should stick strictly to the subject of the submitted paper. Well, obviously no one can stop a candidate from saying something on any subject. The idea is to present your research. If you talk about something completely different, of course, that might not go down very well. But if your work is very abstract, for example, you might be able to give a metaphor or an analogy that the analogy may not feel like it strictly follows the subject, but it might give the audience some insight. The main thing is to give the audience insight into what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what value it might possibly have. I think with that, we should probably move on. We have more time for questions later on, so let me move on for a moment. First impressions. First impressions are going to come from a variety of sources. Remember, the judges are looking around the room. They will see the contestants sitting in some area. They will see how the contestants are interacting with each other. They'll see the contestants walk towards the stage, maybe stumble onto the stage, maybe have a problem starting. Again, etiquette, how the person presents himself or herself can be quite important. First impressions is something you cannot take away from a human being, and first impressions can make quite a big impact on the final evaluation of any kind of talk. So I do think you should take that seriously. Here's a slide that is quite engaging from my perspective. It's one of our colleagues here at McMaster University. He presented this last year in Philadelphia, sniffing out weapons with microwaves. I think this is a great slide. It's not overly dramatic. It's meaningful. It's got a good title. It's metaphoric. Obviously, microwaves don't sniff, so there's a metaphor to it. Notice also the citation in the bottom right-hand corner in a very subtle way. So in a very subtle way, the logo of the university is indicated, and also who is responsible for the image. Don't just take images from anywhere and put them into your slide without citation. Again, to do with first impressions, this is a candidate I worked with a number of years ago, Tong Guo, and one of the things that is really characteristic of his presentation, and you should look it up on the internet, his video is there, look at all those gestures. Look at his open arm gestures, very, very big gestures. And when he holds his hands, that gesture in the top right-hand corner when he's holding his hands is actually meaningful. He's not holding his hands for comfort. He's holding his hands to express something in his talk. So do take a look at that. I think that's quite impressive. And gentlemen, T, please take a look at how he's dressed. We can talk about that later if you like. So some instructions on titles. I think there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to creating your title for your presentation. Here you can see some examples of some cleverly written titles. Sweat So You Don't Forget. Again, sniffing out weapons with microwaves. Are we drinking pharmaceuticals? Scientifically quantifying the craft of acting. These are all cleverly written and use some form of metaphor, literary device to add impact to what they're going to be talking about. I will say I don't believe it's absolutely critical to have a very catchy title. I think you can get away with using a title that just plainly describes your research. The two things you have to be careful about when it comes to creating your titles is make sure that it's not too long. It shouldn't be an absolute mouthful to say. And also make sure that you avoid jargon, like we were talking about before. Avoid jargon in your title so that your audience isn't immediately confused or put off by some words that they feel they should understand but don't. Right. I've come to think quite a lot about titles, and in some way I would almost suggest brainstorming a variety of titles which will then inform the slide, which then inform the speech. It's rather interesting. Anyway, we have some nice ones from IMS Symposia as well, and Erin is there to talk about them.
Right. So these are the titles of prize-winning 3MT speeches from the past 2 years at the International Microwave Symposium. You can read them yourselves, but they are Finding Your Way in the Electromagnetic Grand Canyon. They are Don't Talk Back. Another one is Origami, Unfolding the Future of Engineering. Another one is Hero Whisper in the Middle of a Concert, Be Selective. Now, one thing to think about when you're crafting your title is that this will be the judge's first impression of you, and this will be the audience's first impression of you. Even before the competition begins, before the MC stands up on stage, the judges will have a scoring sheet that lists everybody's name and their affiliation and their title. So I do think it's important to come up with a catchy title. As Daniel says, it may not, be the end-all, be-all. You can still have a good presentation, even if you aren't in love with your title. But it is important to come up with a good one. What makes a good one? I suppose that a good title would do the same things that a good first sentence hook would do. Right? It makes the listener curious. It doesn't overwhelm them immediately. You absolutely must avoid jargon in your title. Even the word electromagnetic seems a bit jargony here, and if it weren't surrounded by other friendly notions, it might be inappropriate. Right, avoid jargon and make the listener curious to hear more. Don't overwhelm them. Great.
Okay, so moving forward, a few last-minute tips when you're actually doing your presentation. My recommendation is that if the screen is center stage, your authoritative position is to stand downstage right, which means looking at the screen from an audience point of view to the left. And avoid barriers. This is, I think, a general suggestion for any kind of presentation. Don't hide behind a barrier if at all possible. And, of course, in the 3-minute thesis, we won't let you hide behind a barrier. And hopefully the staging will be such that this optimal stance is possible. Now, your audience and your judges will hear your host's introduction. There'll be an MC or host who will be introducing you. They'll hear the introduction. They'll see you stumble onto the stage. They're biased before you even utter your first word. They may not like your slide right away. And of course, don't forget the audience and judges absorb audience reactions, and they tend to consider relative performance. So when you're watching a video, for example, and you're wondering why the judges may have reached a certain conclusion and how on earth did this particular video make it to where it did, remember that the video has been edited. A lot of stuff that the judges saw has all been edited out of the video. So watching a high-ranked video, remember it's not live, and the videographer or editor made creative choices. And in that video, where is the slide? Is it visible the whole time? Has the editor brought it in for a few seconds and then removed it? All of these things give you a different impression than the live impression that the audience and judges had on the day of the competition. So watch lots of videos, but beware of making too many assumptions about them. Again, whether you have an abstract subject or something that is a humanitarian part to it, communicate your expertise somehow, indicate that you're qualified to do this, indicate your sources and your citations, indicate that you're committed to the long haul. Nobody likes to feel that you're just simply making some kind of a presentation and then after it's over you're on to something else. Give the impression that you're committed to this, to the long haul. If you can say, for example, I'm so passionate about this subject, I'm going to start my own company after I get my PhD and put my own money into this. I mean, if it's true, say it. Show your passion somehow. Indicate your story, your journey. How did you get to this point? Indicate your setbacks. I really cannot stress this enough. A lot of people avoid this completely. Setbacks is what makes drama drama. Things that went wrong can be very interesting to talk about. There are many ways of doing this, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't take enough advantage of natural setbacks in their work. Obviously, indicate your vision for the future. What's your message? Indicate your personal humanity and your passion for your work. So with that, we reach some acknowledgments here. I have lots of people to acknowledge, particularly Michelle Ogrodnik and Anna Kovacevic, who've done workshops with me, and Barbara Fennessy, and then John Vlachopoulos, who I talked to about these subjects quite extensively, and lots of other people, including Rashonda Henderson, Ramesh Gupta, Michael Hamilton, and various other people I've worked with. Further reading and viewing, we have extensive lists and links in the slides here that you could go to. The rules, for example, from Australia, if you want to go and take a look at that. We have all our rules for the 3-minute thesis for IMS on the IMS 2019 website, but still, you might want to go and look at the original ones as well. There are some YouTube videos that you can watch, and in the middle of this slide, you'll see some articles that Erin Kiley and I have written for Microwave Magazine. You might take a look at some of those. At the bottom is a workshop that I did with Anna Kovacevic. And here you'll see more YouTube videos, and in particular, here you'll see I've listed those earlier, the two playlists, the one from IMS 2017 and the one from 2018, and the McMaster Electrical and Computer Engineering Department playlist from last year. And again, some more books and other material that you can read. So with that, I think we should end the formal presentation. We have time for questions, 5 minutes or so. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, actually, there are a few more questions here. So let's try to squeeze a few more of these in. So, any comments on how important it is for the speaker's accent and pronunciation?
The importance of accent. Well, I think that is always an issue, and I've worked with people who have had issues like that, and in fact, Kanchu Zhang had some significant issues in that area. I worked with her for quite a number of hours on articulation, and in one rehearsal, Daniel was actually at one of our rehearsals, and he remembers what we actually did. You know, it's very important to work on articulation, and one of the ways of doing that is to find somebody who is not tuned to your way of speaking and see what words and phrases they don't understand. And then you make a note of these words that they may, or phrases that they don't understand, and you either practice them appropriately or you replace those words and phrases with alternative words and phrases. I did that with Tong Guo. Again, watch his video. Tong Guo had problems with certain parts of pronunciation and articulation, and we spent a lot of time working on that. It's worth doing.
Okay, here's one with some, I would say, kind of mechanics of how to, leading up to the event. So, specifically, this person says women are often very short compared to the height of a podium. What to do if there is no other option to access the microphone?
Erin, do you want to jump in on that?
Right. So I may as well jump in and say, first off, it's not just women who are often short compared to the height of a podium. And second, one good way of mitigating this is to make sure that your podium is not the only option. So it's good to arrive at the venue pretty early, a day early or early in the morning of your presentation. Those wouldn't be unreasonable, just to make sure that you'll have access to either a lapel microphone or to a handheld microphone so that you can get away from that podium and get out onto the stage. But if your only option really is...
In the 3-minute pieces, of course, there will be a mic, and you will not be hiding behind a podium. So
at the IMS,
the whole idea is to have some kind of a portable microphone and get away from the podium.
Right. I know this is true at the IMS 3-minute thesis, but this question was asked by someone who is not an IMS 3MT finalist, so I don't know what context they're asking from. If their option really is only to use the podium, then they might want to bring a sturdy box or a platform to stand on. That wouldn't be unusual. Anyone who's seen many presentations done before has seen this happen before. I've personally seen it several times. So it wouldn't be unusual. No one's going to think twice about it if you bring a box with you to stand on.
Sounds good.
Yep, that sounds great.
Yeah, the questions?
Well, there is a question here about how to download this presentation. There should be a link on the audience view to be able to download the slides presented here. If that's not working, speakers, John, Aaron, Daniel, would you all be open to someone emailing you and getting these slides from you directly?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But it should be at some point, right, Mike?
Yeah, it may not be on there right now. If there is a link on the site, there is a link there, and hopefully the slides can be acquired from that. So either you can, to the audience members, you can either email one of the speakers from today. Yeah, or once the archive view is up, you should be able to get it from that as well. All right. So actually, I think we probably should call it today because we're close to being out of time. There are a few more questions in the queue, and we'll try to get the presenters to follow up with those offline. So as we said earlier, the session will be archived on the Society website at mtt.org, and all the registrants will get an email reminder with the website when that's available. Also, for attendees who would like to receive PDH credits, please follow the link in the webcast view and use the code that's provided on the last slide of this presentation, which is being shown right now. And also, once again, I'd like to thank John, Aaron, and Daniel for this really excellent presentation, really informative, reminded us a lot about how to make better presentations all around. So thank you for that. And also special thanks to our audience for joining us today. We hope you found today's event valuable and that you'll return for future IEEE Microwave Theory and Techniques Society webcasts. Thank you and have a great day.